Hi, Fernand.
Hello, you're all right.
Hiya.
I am somewhat honoured to be here. Pretty cool.
Oh, I'm excited to speak to you.
Fernand, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into like the crux of this episode, because it's a different kind of episode for us, but still really like fashion focused. But
Yeah.
go ahead, tell us like your background, what you do, and where people can find you as well.
Sweet. Well, my name is Fernand. I have the title of what many people call themselves these days, a creative.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of an overused term, but I think I have a bit more seriousness whenever I use it. But yeah, as a creative, my main job, I should say, I chiefly work in TV. My main one is working as a creative lead at a movie channel. So I take care of all the graphics and the creative, direction, so to speak, of the channel, how things look and feel, both on air and off air. And also help with with our productions, because everyone's all making their own productions these days. Mm-hmm. And outside of this, I also have a freelance creative once again, but I take care of loads of different things. So from shooting to editing to helping with production and research on shows. So I've worked at the BBC a number of times, and then also graphic design and motion design. So anything that looks good and helps interact, well, I guess in terms of productions to brand to whatever it is, to help give a bit more of a sort of intuitive experience between the person to what they look and see look at and see, I guess, is what I do. So
cool. And amazing. you also so you do like a lot of graphics and like visuals for other like YouTube channels and things, but you yourself have a YouTube channel. Tell us a bit about that as well.
I do indeed. This all started off from my passion of watching lots of live TV and tweeting about it like crazy and bothering all my mates about it like crazy. And I have a YouTube series called Fernand's Live Show, which is probably the most imaginative names for a show.
Yeah.
Actually, I literally that Ron seal does what it says in the tin. So basically, I just wax lyrical about the creative side of live TV. So I look at how things are done behind the scenes, how sort of creative thought and developments actually how it's impacted a lot of productions. Mm-hmm. So a couple of my last episodes focus on, for example, the X Factor and how dramatic they make their introduction. So it's not just a case of big text and 3D, all of that kind of thing. There's a lot of science behind it, and a lot of thought behind it, which actually makes each episode a lot more effective. That's just one episode. I just talk a lot about big, live, exciting shows and the creative side of things.
Yeah.
It's Fernand's Live Show. Easy to remember, and definitely being a pleasure.
Cool. Scarlett, I have to let you know, because I feel you two will have a big connection, but Fernand is an encyclopedia of Eurovision knowledge. Eurovision is
that's probably something I should mention at first. Yeah.
Biggest passion.
Oh no!
He will tell you the year this country won, what song it was with, who performed it. Like,
but I love that you have a lot of knowledge of like behind the scenes of like big things. I think that's something that Mim and I hope is actually interesting about stuff we talk about, is that fashion sometimes a topic where people think like, oh yeah, it's clothes or it's this or it's that, but they actually don't know what goes into being behind that. And I think it's really interesting, like your live show that like you're saying with a show as big as the X Factor, that people don't know actually, like you think you're watching live TV, but like there are literally people sat there like hovering over their buttons to like press things at the right time and make it as enjoyable for your viewing pleasure. And I think people don't realize, like, people take stuff like that for granted, that there's so much that goes on. So it's really cool that you also sound like you do so many things.
Man of many, what's the saying?
Man of many talents.
All of that pretty much. So it's good fun actually, and the wonderful of live TV. As much as it's big and exciting as it is, there's always a lot to it, which is always something I like talking about. And obviously, this links really well with fashion shows in particular. So
I think a point that Scarlett touched on as well is that fashion very often is seen as quite fickle, superficial, or it's just about the visuals of it. And I think one kind of issue that arose from like, you know, there was during Brexit and all the Brexit talks and everything, there was so much focus on like lots of different types of industries. And I remember I think it was the editor-in-chief of like Business of Fashion, and he was talking about how much the fashion industry brings to like the UK economy, because it's more than just clothes. It's like it's billions worth of like not just design, production, logistics, but you have like the shows, the talent, the just like building the sets. When we talk about like Chanel, which has like the most iconic fashion show sets while Karl Lagerfeld was alive, those are like huge performance.
Those are like £1 million.
Huge experiences.
Exactly. So and then like when you consider like what's going on now, one of the massive reasons that we wanted to have you on is because the nature of fashion shows in this past year has completely changed. Not that we didn't have shows before, obviously, but this like audienceless, different digital format type of show. And we just thought you had like a wealth of knowledge for that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting how the pandemic has changed absolutely everything. It's one of those things where something happens in the world and it may affect certain things and may not affect others, but we're living in really interesting times where virtually everything has been affected by it, obviously including events and things which require lots of people. And cheeky little plug, something I actually talked about in one of my other episodes where the pandemic in my show, the pandemic actually affects the events industry. But as you mentioned, especially with fashion shows where it's all about people and crew and bringing things together from various parts of Europe or even the world. It's massive how we've had to adapt to change basically and think of new creative ways to do so. Chanel, for example, I've seen some incredible fashion shows that have had to obviously change to these times, where previous years they've been full of like creativity and in an almost traditional way. But as a result of such things, you've seen it's almost like having to like really boil down your creative ideas and think of what can we actually do. We've got less available people, so to speak, or less resources. What can we actually do to do something just as impressive or even better? And we've seen some really good stuff, which is, I guess, almost a testament to the sort of human spirit. But in terms of production, in terms of creativity, sort of thinking, what can we do with less things?
Yeah, and so like, I think before we talk about some of the different ways people have maybe like used this pandemic to kind of be more creative with how they translate their show, even just the simple thing of live streaming a show, like what kind of would go on in that. So like, for instance, a company I worked for had the most tragic live stream once where like it was just must have been a webcam in like the corner of a building, and that was just one angle. You couldn't see the shirt, like the clothes or anything. But like when you watch a Chanel, a Dior, like the big names, you have angles, you have like all these different things, and that must be really difficult to like know when to cut to the different cameras. So like there's got to be a lot that goes on even in just relaying it.
I think what's really good is that a lot of fashion shows, I guess even in previous years, it's taken the experience of not just people that are actually there sitting within the actual along the catwalk. They've actually thought of it more of a TV production or more of a production which can be viewed online. So oftentimes they would work really closely with production companies to actually plan camera plots and plan actual movements, so that outside of it, when it comes to watching it halfway across the world, you get a full experience of watching the show as if you were there, almost taking it, almost giving you a bit of a better experience of rather than actually being there, which is actually really, really good. And especially in this pandemic, we've seen that taken even further. So we haven't seen sort of traditional sort of, okay, let's try and simplify things, let's have your regular runway show but with less people. We've actually seen it being developed into film type productions, into sort of these mixed media type things, using a bit of live action, using a bit of filming as if it was actually a film production, so to speak. And even in some cases, I think it was Helsinki Fashion Week, which was towards the end of last year, I think it was. They've gone as far as using 3D technology and VR and AR to really push the boundaries of it. So it's less a case of being in the venue where the actual runway is. It's more about really taking it out there, which is incredible to actually really push the boundaries. So less webcam in the corner and more of a experience. And I think it's what us viewers these days, we sort of demand more, we expect more. And especially if you've got huge fashion houses that are full of imagination and full of creativity and able to push the boundaries, we sort of expect a bit more from them every year. So I think it's all about just pushing the boundaries, especially now where we're forced to think a bit differently.
Yeah, definitely. When you say that, it reminds me two shows in particular. One being Louis Vuitton Men's, which the Virgil Abloh one, which was like a poetry stage performance play thing more than anything. It wasn't this like linear show, but there was so many camera angles, and then like the poetry was part of the production. And I think there was a large part where the camera was weaving throughout the models, and we were seeing them like stood on like plinths or whatever, or on the ground, and the camera was weaving in between these models so that we could get like multiple angles. And I think I saw a backstage shot, it was like they had just like phones on like selfie sticks to kind of get that downwards angle, and that's not something you could ever experience if you were sat there in real life watching a show. And then another one that's similar is Fendi's their first couture one, and I think their women's wear one recently, and that they walked in between these like perspex Fs, and then they all ended up, well, in the couture one they ended up in these perspex boxes, and that's not something that we would have seen or Fendi would have been able to do had there been an audience there sitting there. So yeah, it is more about this like experience, which arguably could be better than being there in real life. Yeah,
I think it's a bit of a blessing in disguise where as a result of that, of people not necessarily having to be there, fashion houses have now got this opportunity to think, okay, let's make it a bit more different. We've got a bit more of a creative license now to actually make it to a full production. We can do things several times, like I guess in parallel of a natural fashion show where you got one chance to get it right. You got to make sure the model walks down without falling or tripping over. You've got to make sure that the actual clothes are pinned and fitted in the right place. Everything just has to be perfect. It's almost like a one take type thing, pretty much like a live show. But essentially it's a live show. But with this, it's presenting an opportunity where things can be fine tuned a bit more. Things can actually be a bit more precise. So it adds a bit more. I guess it's twofold. One, it allows for a bit more perfectionism, which can have its sort of positives and negatives, but then also it gives a sort of a holistic experience of incorporating other forms of filming techniques to make it a bit more of a, wow, okay, this fashion house is really just taking it to the next level. LV, as you mentioned, is an incredible example of that, how it starts off in the middle of this huge snowy atmosphere, outdoors type thing. It's cold. It's obviously it basically helps set the tone of what the show is set to be about. And some fashion shows utilize a bit of this, probably at the beginning or just something to whatever. But in this case, it's actually part of it. You see lots of clips of being taken back out into this snowy. It's not really a forest, is it? It's just sort of outdoors, pretty much.
Yeah.
To help remind and help set the tone and make it less of a typical fashion show, but more of a multi-layered performance experience, utilizing a bit of rap, utilizing various camera techniques and all of that. Speaking of really cool tech, which I even noticed, in the second half of the show, which is just after Yassine Bey's performance, or even sort of interspersed between it, there is, well, I think, I've got to find out in detail, there's a camera which they use at the Oscars, which it's one of those high-speed robotic ones. Yeah, where you would have, I don't know, for example, at the Oscars, you'd have like obviously someone on the red carpet, and it's, there's really cool slow motion ones where they sort of pose and everything's done really.
It's like what Vanity Fair you started doing.
The 360 outfit thing.
Yeah, and it's used in a very, very small way. But if you look really closely, it's one of those sort of head-on profile type shots in the second part of the fashion show where you actually see the actual profile of what they're wearing.
Yes.
And really quickly and slows down. So it's not used as creatively or as effectively as Vanity Fair at the Oscars, for example. But it's good to see, again, using another cool piece of tech. So rather than, as well as using Steadicam to really get up and close, they're using other forms to really slow things down beautifully, which is really nice to see.
Mm.
We interrupt this broadcast to remind you, go follow us on Instagram, Style Over Substance Pod. Shoot us an email, styleoversubstancepete@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, find us on Twitter. We've got all the links on our Instagram. You know what to do.
Another thing that I've kind of noticed, and like Scarlett, let me know if you think the same too, but before, as I mentioned, like Karl Lagerfeld's Chanel shows were like, that was the big deal of like the season. Like, what is the theme going to be this season? And it was heavily dependent on like the set. And they used to, I can't remember the name of the building that they always used to have their shows. Scarlett, you probably know. Yeah. It's in Paris. Yeah, we've forgotten. Yeah. But it was always in the same like building, but the set would be like built from the ground up, and it would always be a different theme. So it'd be like the snowy Alps, or it would be, I don't know, this kind of like Japanese garden or whatever, or the water fountain. And so like the theme was like all the focus, let's say, was so much on the built set. Now it's less about the built set and more like, I don't know, I've seen more outdoor locations, and I've seen more examples of where like all the models are kind of like coming in and out of each other. And I think there's one by Ulla Johnson where the models are in a museum and they're walking in and out in between the statues. I think that was one that we kind of like showed to you. And so I've seen more of that and less about like what the stage looks like.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's like a sort of an extended chance of more freedom of expression. So whereas instead of walking down a straight line and then coming back, they've sort of just taken it to a completely different direction now. So as you mentioned, Ulla Johnson sort of walking through. So one shot you'd have almost like a semi-side profile shot of someone walking a little bit slowed down, so you can sort of see the detail in the fabrics. And at the same time, in the same shot, you could probably see another model doing the same sort of thing. So it's another really creative way of just blending different types of seeing an actual outfit rather than your sort of traditional way. And as you mentioned, in terms of using a beautiful set, incorporating it, what I really liked about Ulla Johnson's one is a lot of the clothes, a lot of pieces, I should say, were linked, actually in terms of color and stuff like that, were linked beautifully with the actual venue. So lots of yellows and browns and mustards and that kind of thing, lots of layered fabrics, which actually worked really well with the actual venue. So you can tell, rather than being fixed to lots of your traditional way of things, that's another form of really just thinking, okay, what can we do in this pandemic to really wow the people, despite the fact that we may be in slightly challenging times. So that's a really good example of it.
Yeah, and these are kind of things that we sort of touched on before, where like, if there were people there, you obviously as a enjoyer of a fashion show, if you're sat in a front row, don't want to see some guy with his camera up in a model's like skirt hemline, or like giving a zoom in on the bag or the shoe. Like, you don't want to watch that. You don't want to see that that's what it takes to get those shots. And I wonder if like these fashion films almost are actually going to change the face of like, maybe there'll be both, like a show and these films, because like for regular folks who don't attend fashion shows, our enjoying pleasure will be significantly reduced once this is over if like these fashion films aren't kept up.
Yeah, I think some fashion houses will take that opportunity to go further, because I can imagine this would have been an idea by a major fashion house like years before, thinking, I want to ditch the fashion show and actually make some more of a fashion film. I can imagine something like this would have been met with fury and shock and like, what? You can't be doing this. We've got to be there. We've got to see the actual pieces in action. You can't be taken away. So, so it's almost like providing, it's almost opened a door to be like, okay, well, now we can actually do this. which is why we've seen such imaginative pieces out there. You also mentioned about sort of cameras and stuff like that. I think it's Balmain's one.
Balmain,
yeah, which is really cool actually, because that one almost like a traditional type fashion show. Sort of massive catwalk. Actually, I love that one actually, just in terms of like you could see the first part with the woman sort of sashaying down, just exuding confidence, all that. Loved it. Anyway, a couple of shots you can actually see they've got a really there's a robot camera sort of just going up and down the catwalk kind of thing. Which, again, which is really useful, I guess, in these times where less crew, less people actually getting involved and stuff like that, and it also helps to minimize sort of essentially cameras getting in the way of viewers, really, because it enables from a distance being able to actually get up and close with pieces, with models and all of that, without having to actually physically be there, which is really handy. So that's another piece of really cool tech which they've actually used. But in terms of breaking the rule book, breaking all the rules and thinking of something different in terms of fashion films and whole experiences where you can actually view it anywhere in the world. These houses are really thinking of really cool ideas. I think there's Balenciaga, however, who have actually sort of kept it traditional. They've sort of kept it pretty much the same, but they've sort of made it 3D kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Balenciaga have, like, from my opinion, took the approach of it's more like a lookbook. So I know like lookbooks have been around for a long time, and often it was seen as like a cheaper option if you had a small brand and you couldn't afford like a big show. Then doing a lookbook was really like cheap and effective. You could show the whole collection, but less expensive. But Balenciaga have done this almost like video game avatar, highly digitized, like they it's quite a basic premise, but you can tell they've thrown a bit of money at it as well.
Because to do something like that, where essentially you got an actual live action shot of a model sort of walking down, to actually incorporate it effectively, obviously without it making not look too much like green screen or whatever techniques they've used, it's not the easiest thing to do, because it can easily go wrong. The tracking can sort of further break the illusion of watching something that's effective. So it's a well-done version of just basically taking the idea of being in an actual arena, venue where you can actually watch the fashion show, obviously made it virtual. Even a few little random Easter eggs in there. I think it's like 10 seconds as you're actually panning left to right. I think one of the shots you actually pan even further to the right, and then you got an actual shot of someone staring at you. It's actually quite funny. So
oh my god.
So it adds a bit more sort of like, as you're looking up and down, it's like, and you go back to it. So it's really cool.
I think, they're always trying to be a bit weird, to be honest. And like, that's their thing, like high fashion. It's like high, low brow with Balenciaga all the time. But one thing I wanted to ask you is like the cost of these things, because as mentioned before, lookbooks traditionally, let's say like just a few years ago, were seen as like more cost effective, or like doing or putting together a short film or a short video to display your collection was seen as cost effective, rather than putting in this whole live in like audience production. Do you think that these are actually cheaper for brands and they'll see it as like a cost effective way to move forward, or is it just as expensive and we'll just see more and more money thrown at these, like as Scarlett said, like fashion films now?
That's a really good question.
They now think it takes £1 million to put on a fashion show.
Wow.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's not more,
like that's kind of like roughly, and that's not a Chanel songs and dancing, like that's you getting your influencers in, you're paying for them to stay in a hotel, or lending people pieces or gifting, you're not only probably then like giving them a perfume if you're that kind of a brand, like there's a whole user experience plus the venue plus the models plus the hair and makeup, like the whole team, and then flying like I worked for a brand where they showed in Paris but were based here, so then you've got to fly your team out. So do you think fashion films save those costs? I imagine probably not, but I also have no idea.
It's a really good question, because in some cases you would definitely think that we can spend a bit less money, we've got less people coming in, we can spend a bit of money, spend a bit less money here and there. although in some cases the money that would be saved from sort of getting other influencers and things that would be necessary for a fashion show, they can easily pump into other areas to sort of still deliver that whole experience. So I think Chanel still had Kristen Stewart in there in terms of a big name and getting them involved, even though she was just sitting there watching models go up and down. But then you've got Machino, for example, which was beautiful, completely different, where all the actual pieces were actually put on puppets. So the first thing that came to mind when I watched it, I was thinking, they probably could spend a lot less money doing so. But in terms of the little detail and everything, and making it look as effective as it would be on an actual full-size thing, I imagine there would still be quite a bit of money in there, I guess. And materials and all that. Obviously miniature size, so that could go either way kind of thing.
But is that like a stop-start motion type form of filming that they would have had to do, or
perhaps,
is that quite actually intensive, like for what looks like a simple effort of a puppet show is probably like
absolutely
much harder than they've made it look.
Definitely, especially when it comes to getting various shots, doing it again and again and again and again, which isn't one of those sort of I guess it's a result of having to film things as a film, as a production, as opposed to your typical fashion show, where you would have to take things again, and especially for things which require so much detail, if they have the budget and the time for it to perfect it and get shot again and again, they definitely would do so, which obviously would result in a bit more of the moolah being used. So definitely. And then you've got Dior, which completely just blew the sort of thing out of the water in terms of just how beautiful it is in terms of a fashion film, where how it's filmed, the detail, the cinematography and all of that.
You know what? I think in general, and like Scarlett and I, we give a lot of shit to Maria Churi's Dior because everyone's like, oh, it's not that great. But I will say, in terms of like presentation from last year's couture show to this year, I think that they've done a really good job in like taking that. We're doing a film. We're going whole hog, because you've mentioned the Moschino and how it was like miniature sized and stuff. Last year's Dior Couture was these small busts, and all the couture pieces were made to fit that bust. And it was about taking these outfits out of a dollhouse, and this dollhouse was being carried around this forest and presented to like mermaids and other like mythical creatures in the forest, and then they would come out of the river and put on this dress and then lounge around. It was a film, and that was like a harken back to how these I think Christian Dior himself liked to have these pieces made. I
think it was a post-war, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it seemed like a waste of material to make all your pieces up. So you would make the miniatures very like they'd be a similar size to the ones on that Moschino show.
And that's how you would show it, these pieces, to your clients. So they've done, and then they've taken that idea, and then this year they came with like this, it was like the Mummy mixed in with like Tomb Raider mixed in with like, but in like this elegant version. And I think they've done really well in creating a film. Like, this was no way about being a show, a fashion show. This was like costume design. It blurred that kind of line, I think.
And I guess it's another example of a fashion film where I guess in terms of just showing the actual beauty and the detail and just sort of not even just say it's a visual experience, but also tapping into the mystical and all the sort of stories of sort of as you mentioned, sort of like mermaids and this and that, and all the little sort of mystical stories that really play with your mind, that kind of thing, which really sort of tap into it, that being less of just a visual spectacle, but just make it into an entire experience, which really is another good example, a good result, a happy accident, so to speak, of creativity in the pandemic.
Also, I think, with Scarlett, you said that before you would fly in like your best clients to come and see these shows, you'd be gifting, you'd be doing all that. That still kind of happened this year. Although they don't come in for the show, like sending out like these big box lookbooks a la Loewe and JW Anderson to like people's houses across the world. I think what you're saying, Fernand, like I can definitely see how this has not been any cheaper for anyone.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was when lockdown wasn't so serious. I think it was Dior where or maybe it was Louis Vuitton, one of the two. Louis Vuitton, because they had Louis Vuitton popcorn and stuff. And they like rented one of those like old school cinemas in London, and like all the influencers flocked there, but they have their outfits. And I know even Dior, like, just to sit and watch it on Zoom on your phone or your laptop, you're decked out in Dior.
Yeah.
Because I was saying, like, actually these fashion films could be a really great way for the fashion industry to address like the carbon footprint that they have, because they're one of the world's worst contributors. But then if you're still shipping stuff to these across the world, like, is that really any different from having them fly in? Because then actually, like, the fashion week, they're in Paris then for however many days for multiple shows and stuff. I don't know if that is like a good solution. But it's a really interesting like take on like user experience and like seeing how they've interacted with influencers in such different ways, like you were saying with like virtual reality. Like, I can't even begin to imagine that must be a difficult shoot. Like, that's got to be super technical, and would that be like one of the highest tiers of like impressive kit and like money thrown at something, or actually are those like super fine shots that like, and like, is it the editing of like a Dior thing where like you're making someone look like a mermaid and like, I want, like, what is it that actually costs more to put these things together, or is it a combination of stuff?
It usually is a combination of stuff, and you'll sometimes read reports of how a fashion show, one particular fashion show would cost millions of pounds, and it's really simple in terms of how it is. But again, I guess of the lot of effort and the work is done behind the scenes versus something which looks opulent, which looks expensive, but is a fraction of the cost. And I guess with VR and AR, it's expensive to do, I guess, on large scale, but it's becoming so popular and so well used these days that the cost almost justifies the demand in many cases, especially how you see simple versions of it when you're using certain apps on your phone, for example, when you're visualizing things and you move your phone around and things are moving around in sort of 3D space, for example. So you're seeing things of that being used on such scale like this. So the popularity almost justifies, especially if it is going to be expensive, then such costs of that. Production-wise, it can go either way, I think, because I know some productions, for example, imagine like Dior's one, I imagine would have just been expensive to produce all the way through. Just because of how beautifully it's shot, I imagine that would have cost millions. But then again, you have got ones which utilize the same kind of thing. For example, LV obviously has a bit of everything. So it has a bit of sort of actual moving camera tech within and without the actual models itself. It uses a bit of live action out on snowy Alps, for example. So that could have also equally been as expensive. So, and I almost feel like a lot of fashion houses like to almost sort of show off a little bit, like, okay, let's see what we can actually do. And so I guess to them, money really almost is no object. So they can go ahead and do X, Y, and Z, and it'll cost so-and-so, because I guess they know that the effect that they want to have out with the viewers when they watch the show is essentially worth it, pretty much.
Yeah. So how long would it take to plan and produce something on this scale?
Oh, it depends on the show, I imagine. So for something like, what was the ones I watched recently? Something like Alexander McQueen, which was delightfully frustrating to watch because they're under the Thames and they've got such
I think that's
pieces.
the brand.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh, it's a show to watch, I must say. That I imagine wouldn't be too expensive, and that would actually be quite quick to actually produce and film. Simply because it's one location or a collection of small locations in a small area. And there's a bit of creative license here in terms of actually filming these actual pieces, so they can storyboard the shots over a period of weeks or a couple of months, that kind of thing, and then go out and then film it, which could be a day or two.
So just for the listeners who might not know the show that you're referring to, the Alexander McQueen one, it was both the men's and the women's were shot in kind of the same story And it was accompanied by still images of the models in the studio. But this video was very like dystopic and filmed on like the embankment of the Thames, and it was like about feral people in this like post-apocalyptic kind of scene. It was really depressing. But it was it was that show.
Yeah, so that I imagine wouldn't have taken too long to film it. One commenter actually I noticed on the actual page or on YouTube actually did say it was almost like it was basically adding to the dystopian hopelessness of 2020 in terms of just how it is.
Yeah, I'm sure that inspired it.
Absolutely. So I guess when it came down to it, and knowing how Alexander McQueen's style is, they probably thought, okay, where's one of the greatest places we can think of to really sort of add to the sort of feel of 2020? It's sort of like a fashion critique, so to speak. And so in terms of location, in terms of planning and filming it, that wouldn't take too long, for example. But then you got all the way to the detail of...
So what's not too long? Just to give us an idea. What is not too long?
Not too long. It varies massively in the production world. So that I'm estimating will probably take a couple of months, I imagine, to plan. From, I guess, starting from finding locations, scouting locations where it could have gone, because it could have gone absolutely anywhere, for example, right down to planning shots, working really closely with the actual fashion houses to make sure that whatever shots the director might have in mind obviously lines up with what the fashion house has in mind as well, and making sure that those two things actually marry, because you can get a situation where the director might be, or the director of the production company may be really out there with ideas, but then if it doesn't actually match up with actually showing what it's about, effectively, there could be lots of backs and forth. So these things can obviously add up time. But I guess when it comes down to getting all the shots ready, I guess, in terms of storyboarding and planning it and then giving it out to filming it, I imagine a couple of months for that one, because I guess it comes down to simplicity of certain things. Right down to LV, I imagine would have taken a whole lot longer, because certain things were obviously filmed in various locations globally. So from the first part where we actually are out in the Snowy Alps, that would have, I need to find where the location of that one is, but that would have taken time to film, wrap that, then go all the way down to Barcelona to actually then do the actual main bit itself. Barcelona, sorry, Paris. Barcelona, yeah, there's lots of inspiration between all the video. But anyway, to actually then film that bit there. So that would have then taken an extended amount of time to plan, but obviously that's due to filming one place, then moving to the other. And then, of course, you've got ones which is like Wheeler Johnson, for example. One venue, pretty straightforward. That would usually take the usual amount of time to plan and produce a fashion show of sorts, but then obviously working closely with a fashion house to then just film it over a course of a day or 2 days, depending on how many shots they want to do and how many shots they want to do, and making sure they get the most and the best of the pieces that are on show. So these things can definitely vary.
And does being outside like really affect that as well? Because we saw a lot more stuff being done outside, and I can imagine that the light has huge impact on that. Like, I know that with films and stuff like that, like night shoots, like they almost film in the middle of the night. So there's no there's consistency. And like, is that kind of a thing of that can totally throw off a shoot for these shows? Like, I think like Burberry's always kind of shown in their like conservatory and stuff like that, but they were outside. And then even that, I don't know if you saw the Burberry sort of, I guess it was their Christmas advert that was dancing outside in London streets.
Yeah, it's one of those sort of common things you hear a lot on TV where directors and continuity managers and all of that, one key thing is the light is going, which is basically refers to when you're filming over the course of the day, and obviously naturally the sun changes light as you move along. And if you wanted to, for example, you're filming a soap or a drama or a film and you wanted to have a specific mood, you would also have a very limited amount of time to do so, because filming at 10 a.m. would feel completely different in daylight to 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So yeah, these things, especially filming outside, obviously up against the elements, it could suddenly start raining, or you may not have the most ideal weather on a certain day when time is really tight. So these
especially
things,
in this country,
especially so, yeah. I mean, in the case of Alexander McQueen, it could have started raining. It would have been perfect.
I bet they would have loved that. They probably,
it
was probably the forecast.
Yeah.
Exactly that, yeah. So there are those extra elements of filming outdoors, which comes down to, I guess, a lot of planning, a lot of forecasting, and sort of hoping for the best in many cases. And 9 times out of 10, when it comes to planning and everything's okay, everything goes without a hitch. It may take a bit longer to get certain shots, as is the usual case with production. But yeah, these things definitely do add up to the time of things, for sure.
So what aspect of like film production in these shows kind of most draws your eye? Are you like a camera guy? Are you a location guy? Are you like a story? Do you look for stories in these things? On like a personal level, what's been your favorite aspects of these fashion shows that we've seen in the past year?
What I've really liked is how every fashion, like every show I've seen, has their own take on creativity in this pandemic, so to speak. I mean, it's something that you would see anyway, in terms of fashion shows from season to season. It'll all be visually different, it'll all be spellbinding, it'll all be breathtaking. But in this case, just how things have been taken in completely different directions, from the little puppets from Skino right down to mixing of locations and media of LV, which is one of my favorites, down to the mystical beauty of Dior. That one particularly took my breath away, especially when I saw it, because I was thinking, is this like an extended advert of sorts? Is it just
it's a perfume ad?
Basically, yeah, essentially, yeah. And right at the very end, we have the actual stills of we actually see the pieces unfold with a bit of text right next to them, almost like flicking through an old book, kind of thing. So what I've really liked is just, the completely diverse range of reactions and takes to what you can do in terms of, okay, we're stuck in this pandemic, bit tight on your sort of usual resources, what can we do about it? In terms of what I sort of look out for whenever I watch something, it kind of takes the enjoyment whenever I watch something. So I'm like, okay, have I got this angle right? What does this angle mean? I find it hard to actually watch something without actually thinking, oh my days, this camera shot, this, that, and that kind of thing.
That's so funny.
All the time. So I could be watching stuff on Netflix or whatever, and I'm thinking, okay, this is effective. I get why I've done that, but not this way, and that kind of thing. So I guess it's also a bit of a blessing in terms of actually watching like this, because you're able to then visualize what the director or what the essentially the fashion house were trying to convey in terms of angles, in terms of story, in terms of really getting up and close, in terms of mixing the traditional elements of a fashion show, watching a fashion show, with pushing the boat in terms of creativity. So traditional elements would be making sure you've got a good clear camera shot of what you see, the actual pieces, like a full length shot of them walking up and down, that kind of thing. Whereas in this case, in a lot of these cases, you can get up and close, you can get some really cool slow-mo shots, you can get a good shot of the detailing of it. You can even get shots of the venue and all that to further add to the feel of whatever is being said, whatever's being shown, I should say. So it's less just, okay, here are the clothes, there's a bit of a rationale about style, it's so-and-so, it's about this, about that. But rather than it being said to you, you also see it, you feel it. So it adds to the whole experience, which is really, really cool. And really good to see. So one of the just looking at all the different shows and how they've really just pushed the boundaries in all of them.
I think you should definitely check out the one that Scarlett mentioned. It's the Burberry Christmas advert, and I think it's called Singing in the Rain, and the music in it is Singing in the Rain. You'll love it, honestly. It's not so much about the clothes, it's definitely more about the cultural significance of Burberry and London culture. We've had an episode talking about Burberry, and that was like quite a big aspect of it. And there's a lot of like, the weather plays into it, obviously Singing in the Rain, it being in London. It's got like, it's like CGI rain.
There's like special effects that are
and snow,
like so well timed, so clever. And like, I think stuff like that is so exciting. And I wonder if actually, I was going to ask you, do you think it's more interesting and exciting as like, obviously film and producing and all of this stuff is creative, and then when you meet forces then with something else that's creative, whether it be a fashion house or whatever it might be, is that like really exciting? Like, because then you can like spur off one another, or is that also like, does it have its frustrations because, you know, like two creators can have a very different idea on stuff as well? But like, I imagine, is there some sort of fulfillment of like, okay, someone who gets it and someone who's not just like film something. Like if there's someone who like has a real concept, and because I guess people who aren't creative maybe give you more creative freedom, but like what's sort of the difference?
Absolutely.
If there is one?
There is. It's almost like a very fine line to tread in terms of lots of creativity making things look beautiful versus adding too much, and it then almost detracts away from what's actually being shown, natural pieces, the whole collection, that kind of thing. There's a very, very fine line, and it's actually quite nice to actually notice that a lot of these fashion houses work really closely with these production companies to really make sure that essentially the best things are on show. And I think a lot of these designers have a bit of a background in mixed media as well, so they're able to visually imagine and visually actually see the best way of actually showing their pieces, as well as obviously working with a production company to make it happen. Because you can get those cases, probably not in the cases that I've seen, but ones where there's lots of effects and lots of effort making the whole experience beautiful, but then it almost detracts away from the actual detail, the style, and the collection of the whole kind of thing, which could be actually deliberate. In some cases, it may be about the whole feel, basically what you'd actually take from it, rather than just showing the clothes. And I think some houses sort of push it in that direction. But there is that sort of fine line to tread of creativity and making it look good versus sort of over salting the soup basically and having too much of it, that it's a bit distracting from what's on the show.
I like that phrase, over salting the soup.
Of course,
that actually reminds me of Miuccia Prada and Raf Simons coming together to do Prada's latest collections, because they're both like joint creative directors now for Prada, and their shows was like being inside a fluffy box of colors, and like very like, like Prada and Miu Miu is very like mod 60s ugly fashion, a little bit beatnik, and although the show was really simple, I do feel like the music and the colors and the models would walk through the rooms and we would get a lot of shots, like the back, the front, the side, and I just didn't really feel like I got a sense of what it was about and what the point was. And for me, I felt, strangely enough, I don't think I got to see like the whole outfits. So maybe that was a result of having like two really like creative people who are like forces of in and of themselves coming together to make something that's cool and edgy, and but really it was like I didn't walk away thinking there's a single item that I would want to wear. So it's a really thin line. I think
that's a perfect example of it, in fact, of basically the mix of what you would usually see in a fashion show. We can actually appreciate things where shots are a lot simpler. You can actually see things how you want to see them. Your eyes just naturally go from one to the other. But then this effect could either be deliberate, as in actually artistic deliberate, or just a result of taking sort of creative liberty, so to speak, where look at this bit and look at this bit, the cell kind of thing.
We've given you all the angles, but like sometimes you don't need them all, like
it's ugly.
But wait, there's more.
Or like I don't need to see what the back looks like.
Was this the same previous one where it was in that sort of, as you mentioned, a sort of a mustard coloured fluffy box type look, and they had lots of cameras spinning from the roof?
That is okay. So two separate ones. Yes, you're right, but two separate shows. So the yellow one with the cameras coming down from the center of that had like screens and cameras coming down from the center of the room. That was last year's presentation, and it was like yellow and black. And then they liked the fluffy, so they brought it back. And it was like in different colors. So each side of the walls and the floor was a different type of fluff. And then the models walked through arches from one room to the other to another, and they snaked around into different rooms. Yeah, Prada, just two separate collections, but more or less a similar theme. The yellow one, I think there was more of a focus on screens and viewing it digitally, and you can actually see the cameras involved.
Very meta in that case, actually. That's I actually find that really interesting, because usually in productions, when watching TV or essentially live TV kind of thing. A lot of effort is undertaken to make sure you don't see the cameras. They're sort of hidden away. They're what you used to see things rather than actually seeing the cameras. Whereas obviously in this case, they become props. I think half of the app cameras actually were just actual props, and I think some of them were actually getting close-ups of the actual items. It's an interesting sort of very meta way of using things that are usually quite hidden away when it comes to productions and actually putting it center of the action kind of thing. It's actually it's very meta, very 2020 in terms of cameras and screens and
Zoom calls. I think that was Zoom calls. Yeah.
That's exactly what I got from it. So yeah, very 2020. Along with Alexander McQueen's Dystopian View, you got Zoom calls on another fashion show. So there you go.
Before this, like, did you follow fashion shows or watch them from like an appreciation of them, like from a presentation standpoint, or was it just not something you ever bothered watching or had an interest in? It was more about live television.
Actually, I used to watch a lot of fashion shows growing up. Actually, so my mum actually studied fashion design. She
I didn't know
did the
that.
whole thing. Yeah, she went to London College of Fashion, did the course of Greatness One as well. So done the whole shebang, the whole lot. So a lot of sort of teenage years, or even years before that, was watching the fashion show or the clothes show, I think it was, on BBC Two. Way back when, yeah. And then right through to fashion shows on fashion TV when it was on Sky, that kind of thing. Lots and lots of that. And yeah, your sort of typical view of fashion shows is obviously a darkened room, a lit catwalk, moody models walking up and down.
Very Tom Ford.
Yeah, essentially. Very straightforward, very, very Tom Ford, very almost stereotypically fashion show-esque type thing. So, I guess it wasn't until the last few years where we're seeing various different versions of it, of being taken out of that, being taken outdoors, taken to rooftops, taken to various places where you can actually see elements of it, which is actually different elements of creativity in this, which I actually really began to appreciate, whether it be from elements of VR. I think it was, because I did a bit of research before this, and the most recent, so I did a bit of sort of light reading, as it were, before this, and I think it was New York's fashion week, I should say, the most recent one involving Mr. Wu, which used basically the rooftop of Spring Studios in Tribeca. Basically sort of a winding catwalk on the rooftop of a beautiful day in September, I think it was, August, September. And in the last few years, obviously, with having such a passion of like watching live TV and productions and seeing how they sort of marry the two in terms of creativity.
Yeah, and actually it kind of feels like, how have we had it for so long that these girls and guys just walk in a straight line up and down and that's it? Yeah, like it actually seems crazy that we were still very much at that point. Yes, a few people were being more creative with it, but really it's taken a pandemic for them to like mix it up, and I actually think it's here to stay.
Yeah. I guess it's just to add on to that, it's really cool to see basically breaking the rules in terms of fashion productions and all of that. It's less of, I think there's also an element of like having to be in the know and being exclusive enough to be in these rooms. Whereas now it's a bit more, the sort of, I don't know, elitism, for whatever a better word, is taken out there. It's less
such a good
being
point.
in there, being sat next to Anna Wintour, and who actually there's a really cool puppet version of her in the Moschino show.
Yeah.
I loved it. I was like, yes, detail. I love that. So it's less about trying to get the best sort of shot of being set next to Kendall Jenner or flipping... I just mentioned her name, Anna Wintour, in a sort of darkened sort of runway situation, and just being, it's less of that, which is not really nice to see, and generally more of the creator's mind of pieces in terms of the experience, in terms of the vision of these shows, which is actually really nice to see. It adds a bit more sort of, a bit more of a creative palette of how things are intended as an artist.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. There's a lot to like discuss in like the idea of shows, fashion shows, and elitism, and who's selected to be there, and like the clientele and stuff. I think that's really interesting. But yeah, I don't have anything else to add. Do you, Scarlett? Thank you so much again for joining us, Fernand. It was a really,
it's been really, really interesting.
Always fun. Yeah, I've enjoyed myself waxing lyrical about creativity and fashion shows. No, it's been really good fun actually. Especially surprising and pleasant to actually see these shows bringing something different.
Well, thanks again for joining us.
My